to explore the Hebrew roots of your Christian faith? Then grab your Bible and let's get started.
Shalom. Welcome back to Tuesday night Torah Studies. I'm going to move some things around here. And I'm just so thankful to be here as usual every day that the Father gives me opportunity to do the work of the kingdom. You know, our work that we've been learning in the book of Acts is the same thing that Paul is teaching us, that we're called to open our eyes to the truth. And this is why we continue in this journey of understanding the Torah, so we can know how to follow the footsteps of our Messiah. So we are continuing in the book of Leviticus. We are on chapter 11 on today, which is a important chapter, just like every other chapter. But before we get there, I want to just talk about a few scriptures that kind of keep us in mind as we're doing this study today. When I was getting prepared for this lesson, I have so many notes for it, but I'm going to narrow it down as we're doing this live because there's so much impact for Leviticus chapter 11. So let me just share a couple of scriptures to keep in mind as we're in this study. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. And this is Paul's letter writing to the Corinthians. He wrote, "Come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you." 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 through 16. You know, I normally use 16, but I'm going to go to 15 also, because this also is echoing Leviticus, just like 2 Corinthians. Verse 15 of 1 Peter 1. Always live as Elohim's holy people should, because Elohim is the one who chooses you, and he is holy. That's why the scriptures say, "I am the holy Elohim, and you must be holy too." So these are two scriptures that we should keep in mind. I mean, there's a lot more in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, but keep this in mind as we're studying Leviticus chapter 11, because it talks about the separated part, set apart believers, the covenant living people. So Leviticus 11 outlines the dietary instructions given by Yehovah to Israel and those who joined in. We can't forget those that all came out of Egypt, helping them distinguish the difference between clean and unclean animals. More than just a list of permitted and forbidden foods, these instructions, these laws reflect the call to holiness, setting Israel and those who joined in, setting them apart as people consecrated to our Elohim, their Elohim at that time. By obeying these instructions, Israel demonstrates their covenant relationship with Yehovah, recognizing that holiness extends even to what they consume. These distinctions way of carrying out physical and spiritual significance, foreshadowing a deeper biblical understanding of purity, obedience, separation, being a sacred or being in profane state. Now, some people that walk the denomination and non-denominational religious system will reject this understanding of Leviticus chapter 11, but they will claim to follow the Messiah, the Christ. They would separate themselves from the Hebrews and the Israelites, but they would teach you that you grafted in. You cannot straddle the fence. come from among them and be holy, for our Father in heaven is holy. Welcome to Reconcile the Kingdom. We're working towards growing in the harmony of the whole with the truth. My name is Patrice Robinson. I'm thankful and praising and magnifying Yehovah for this day, and thankful for all of you who's able to join me live. Once again, we're in this powerful book of Leviticus, learning about the priesthood, for we are a royal priesthood. We are a bride of the Messiah that's coming the second time. And we have to keep this in mind. How do we be that royal priesthood? How do we be that set apart? How do we come from among them? This is the studies that we're always in. I want to take time out and thank all returning subscribers. Thank you for your support. I greatly appreciate you as always. Continue your comments, sharing the link, and giving the thumbs up, as that's a way to help grow the ministry to reach the nations, all about teaching biblical doctrine and most definitely understanding to be able to distinguish the difference between the dogma of man and biblical doctrine. This is why I am called. New subscribers, welcome to the family. Thank you for your support. Thank you for joining me on this journey, joining the family. Just jump right on in and just do the same things that I expressed thankfulness and gratefulness for returning subscribers, making those comments, sharing the link, giving the thumbs up, all those type of things. Send a purple heart to let me know that you join me when I'm live. I mean, you can do any other things on a replay. I greatly appreciate you joining and being a part of this. Don't be shy. We learn from each other. The studies is a lifetime study. And this is why I'm inviting and welcoming all those who are visitors. There are so many of you visitors that stop by, you watch, and you don't hit the subscribe button. And maybe because you thought you were subscribed. So hit that subscribe button, because I'm hoping that you're ready to join the family that does not mind challenging the religious system's teachings that we have been under for hundreds of years. A family that's open to being a lifetime student of the Bible, a family that's ready to explore the Hebrew roots of the Christian faith without fear. He didn't give us a spirit of fear, a sound mind. You know, that's the difficult thing as a believer, to walk in fear. So we begin to have those fears and those concerns become worry. We know we're not supposed to be anxious for nothing. And the scriptures lead us on our path. Now, visitors, I am encouraging you to join this family. It's very easy to join this family. As you will know, it's just hit the subscribe button. Hit that subscribe button below. Don't forget the bell, because, of course, the bell lets you know any announcements or any updates that's coming from the ministry. And that's important to know what's going on. And most definitely, there's other ways to support the ministry, which we kind of encourage all the return subscribers and those who's new to the family. I'm so thankful for them all to not only subscribe, but make comments. Even if you disagree, making a comment respectfully. You know, we don't have to scream and yell at one another. We can have differences and understanding and perceptions and things like that, and still be respectful of one another. Share the link, give a thumbs up, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Spotify, YouTube, and of course, YouTube podcast for those who have that subscription. The Arcade Biblical Studio is open 6 days a week. It's available for you to get the workbooks, the worksheets, the scripture wall arts, and of course, future things that come along the way. And then we have the Cash App, which is what I use for the love drawer for those who want to give monetary. What do your monetary and help me with? It helps grow the ministry. It helps brings in new lighting. It helps bring in new cameras and things like that. It gives me access to get additional research books, all those type of things, and go where the Father tells me to go. So all of these ways of supporting the ministry is available for you. And all you have to do is take a look at the links that's in the description box. You can take a look at that at your own timing. Now, I don't want you to forget, at the end of today's teaching, you have an opportunity to ask questions of everything that's presented to you today. I encourage you to make comments. I encourage your questions and of course, share a link throughout the teaching. I would address the questions and the comments at the end. And sometimes I do it during the teaching, but I will address those as they come in. Now, make sure you have your Bible before you, all the writing utensils that you need. If you purchase the Leviticus workbook, I thank you. The worksheet, I thank you. Whether you have those items, at least have a piece of paper where you can take notes, write things down, and get an understanding. So, I am going to go over the previous chapter as we always do, and that would be Leviticus chapter 10. Now, Leviticus chapter 10 opens up to this tragic event of Nadab and Abihu, the two sons of Aaron, who offered up strange fire. Now, we talked about this last week. They were offering something they knew and was fully aware that they should not do. We learned all this back in Exodus chapter 30, verse 9. They knew that they were not supposed to do this. And so they were stricken dead by Yehovah because of their disobedience. Now, because the priesthood does not touch a deceased body, Yehovah had Aaron's relators, Michelle and Elazaphan, from the tribe of Levi, to carry the bodies of Nadab and Abihu outside the camp, the priest's bodies outside the camp. Also, Aaron and the priests and his other sons, Eleazar and what's his name? Eleazar and I forgot the other son's name. If you remember his name, please type it up in the comment box. Those two sons that were left alive, they were, of course, priests, and they too couldn't touch the bodies, and they also could not really mourn because the work of the kingdom was going on. So Yehovah add additional instructions at this time about not drinking wine. These are the instructions for the priests. Strong drink of wine when you're entering the tabernacle, when you're doing the work of the kingdom. Do not be under the influence of alcohol or any other substance. Don't be under the influence, because how are you going to receive from heaven and you just have full of spirits? He also provided additional instructions on properly handling sacrifice offerings and the priest's role in partaking of the offering. And this time we read that the sons and the daughters. Remember, the high priest, the priestly bloodline, their inheritance was receiving the offerings of Yehovah, their portion of it, as a part of their inheritance. We talked about that also as we've been going through the book of Leviticus. Now, the ending of Leviticus chapter 10 to me is very significant because the way it began and the way it ended. It began with a tragic event of disobedience, and it ended with Aaron's sons receiving the sin offering and not in taking the portion of the sin offering for them to eat in the holy place. And Moses inquired about that, but Aaron had a reason, because their hearts were heavy. Their hearts was not focused on the offering, the kingdom that Yehovah has called them to do the work for. That was acceptable. So you had Aaron saying that, look, would Yehovah even accept this if our heart's not in the right place? He witnessed what happened to his sons, whose heart was not in the right place due to disobedience. And now we have Aaron and it's named Ithithamor, if I can remember his name, and Eleazar. They heart and Aaron's heart was heavy, and they knew their hearts was not in the right place. So now we have a heartfelt understanding of doing the work of the kingdom, because your heart needs to be in the right place, to someone in the beginning who decided to do things in their own way. So we had no word study that we shared during the teaching, but of course that always means you have opportunity to go deeper in the scriptures with your own word study on your own. Cross-reference I have, and including additional scriptures we talked about. The question: are you serving Yehovah according to his instructions or your own ways? Which leads me to my application and insight. The wholeness of Yehovah and the serious responsibility of the priesthood. Remember, we're learning about the priesthood, and we're called as a royal priesthood and the bride. Please focus on the consequences of doing things in our own way, our own eyes. There is always a way that seems right to man, but it leads to the road of destruction, which is what we most definitely read about with Nadab and Abihu. Now, my recommended reading is coming from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14, starting with verse 14, all the way to chapter 7 to verse 1. Let me tell you the reason why. It discusses, do not be unequally yoked, teaching you how to be additional information of a set apart holy people. Now, how do you learn how to be a set apart, unequally yoked, do not be unequally yoked, clean and unclean, profane or sacred, all those things, without reading the Old Testament? You cannot. You have to read the scriptures as a whole. So I'm going to leave my sheet up for a moment to give you opportunity to ask questions, enter your own key points that you want someone for us to read, cross-reference, or anything that you may have for what we just covered, just to overview. Once again, I'm going to leave the sheet up for a moment. So there's a lot to chapter 11, but I think I can shorten it, encouraging you to study for yourself. Leviticus chapter 11. Yehovah spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, these are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth. He's talking about all the animals on the earth. These are the creatures that you may eat. Whatever has a divided hoof, showing split hoofs, and choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. Nevertheless, you're not to eat of these among those who chew the cud, or among those who have divided hoof, the camel. For though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof, so it's unclean to you. Likewise, as rock badgers, hay hacks, depends on what version you're reading. For though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof, it is unclean to you. The rabbit also, for though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof, and is unclean to you. The pig, for though it has a divided hoof, so it shows a split hoof, it does not chew the cud. It is unclean to you. You should not eat any of their flesh, nor touch their carcasses. Remember, we looked up what the Bible considers a carcasses as an animal that dies within himself. They are unclean to you. So this first passage details Jehovah's instructions to Moses and Aaron regarding the land animals that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. So it's always about what is considered food and what is not considered food. That is a way to think of it. What does the Father considers food for me and what he does not consider food for me? Now, the very first instructions that man actually is giving about food is way back in the garden. And Yehovah commanded him, you may eat freely from every tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. That's Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17. So they were giving specific instructions then. Tell me, how did that work out for them? They went from being holy, consecrated, set apart, consistently, constantly in the presence of Yehovah whenever he visits, all the time, to a people who was banished off due to their disobedience. No man can just do what he wants to do. Now, because of that, and still today, man is on the quest to return right back to the tree of life in the paradise of Elohim. We are on this journey. So when Yehovah says that you can eat an animal that is considered food, chew the cud. That means they partly digested food, regurgitated further, and chewing. It may sound gross, but this is what he said you can eat. And not only can they have to chew the cud, they have to have a split hoof divided in two parts. So, for an example, an animal that chews the cud and have a split hoof is like sheep, goats, deers, oxen, and the animals that are forbidden to eat is the ones that don't have both those instructions, chew the cud and split the hoof, or animals like a camel. So a camel chews the cud, but it doesn't have a split hoof. A pig, which is, I know that's the most difficult thing for people to not eat, is the pig because of bacon, pork chops, and ribs and things like that. But the pig has a split hoof, but it does not chew the cud. Now, the Father does not give us distinctive reasons why he chose these animals as far as how he considered was, how can I say this? The choosing of the animals, we do know as far as instructions of not to do it, but why? What's the behind it? Why are these animals considered clean and unclean as far as in heaven understanding? But we do know which ones to eat and which ones not to eat. Again, we started way back in Genesis, understanding that we are to eat a specific way. Now, verse 9, these you may eat or whatever is in the water. Now we're talking about the animals that's in the water, aqua animals, everything that has fins and scales in the water, in the seas, in the rivers, you may eat. They have to have fins and scales. But whatever's in the seas and the river that does not have fins and scales, among all the teeming life of the water, and among all living creatures that are in the water, they are detestable things to you. And they shall be detestable to you. You may not eat any of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcasses. Remember what the carcasses is. Wherever in the water does not have fins or scales is detestable to you. So now we have the animals of the water. creatures that we are supposed to eat and not eat that's in the water. So we start off with the land animals. Now we have the water animals. Fins and scales is a requirement. Trout, salmon, salmon. Those are just two examples, and tilapia is another example that has the fins and the scales. And the animals that don't have the fin and the scales, the shellfishes, that's the shrimp, the crab, the lobsters, that's the catfish. And this is so common among people. I can't just say denominations, non-denominations, because I see people of different faiths that eat these, and I see many different believers of the Messiah who eat these animals, and we know we have instructions not to do that. Now, for some reason, people go into Peter's vision and misinterpret that as a way of, these are the animals that we can eat anything we want. Of course, those of you who's been following me for a while, going through the book of Acts chapter 10, 9, 10, 11, all the way to 15, you understand that this, what Peter's vision is, not about food. So just go back to the teaching for Acts chapter 10, and you most definitely will find that on this channel. Verse 13, moreover, these you shall detest among the birds. Now we go into the animals that fly in the sky. They are detestable, not to be eaten. The eagle, the vulture, and the buzzard, the red kite, the falcon in its kind, and every raven in its kind, the ostrich, the owl, tongue-tied, sorry, the seagull, the hawk in its kind, the little owl, cormorant or a great owl, the white owl, the pelican, the carrion, vulture, the stork, the heron of its kind, and the hoopie, and the bat. Now, these animals you're not supposed to eat. These are the birds that are considered unclean and forbidden for consumption. This is now for us to eat. Now, we do know the bat, it's kind of like but some people don't consider a bat a bird, but we do know the language of that time. A bat is what bird that the Father said not to eat. So we got these unclean birds of prey. Then we have, of course, we have the birds that are predatory, like the eagle, the vultures and scavengers, and these specific animals of the birds that we're not supposed to eat. And it's hard for people. They think, again, we can eat, we want to eat, but that is not what the scripture says. Remember, we're keeping in mind the two verses we went through in the beginning. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17, 1 Peter and chapter 1, verses 15 through 16. As we read this, because you're supposed to be separated, you're supposed to be holy, you're supposed to come up from among them. Do not, touch the unclean thing. You don't know what's unclean until you go again in the Torah. Verse 20, all the winged insects. So these the little creepy crawlies that people call, that walk on all fours are detestable for you. Yet these you may eat. Among all the winged insects that walk on all fours, those that have jointed legs above their feet, which jump on the earth. These of them you may eat. Locust of its kind, the devastating locust in its kind, the crickets in its kind, the grasshopper in its kind, but other winged insects that are four-footed or detestable to you. So we went from the land to the water to the air. now we to the insects, the little creepy crawly things. There are certain ones that are clean and unclean. You can eat the locusts, you can eat the crickets, you can eat the grasshoppers. You know, and matter of fact, we done seen many of God's people who's eating those type of animals in the scriptures. But you can't eat those little creepy crawlies that don't leap like flies, beetles. Those are, those crawly things are all considered to be unclean for you, unclean for us. Verse 24. By these, moreover, you will be made unclean. Now, this can be challenging. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening. Now, that's important because some people don't understand some of the times when you're unclean, you're just unclean to the evening. And uncleanness is not sin. He just said you've been unclean to evening. Whoever picks up any of these carcasses shall wash his clothes and be clean until evening. As for all the animals which have a divided hoof, but do not show a split hoof, or do not chew the cud, they are unclean to you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. Now, it's the carcasses you become unclean. Also, whatever walks on its paws among all the creatures that walk on their all fours are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses become unclean until evening. And the one who picks up their carcasses shall wash his clothes unclean until evening, and they're unclean to you. So, unfortunately, we are living in a time that people do not study the scriptures. So automatically, a dead animal to them, whether you are cleaning a dead animal to prepare for food and things like that, they automatically consider that unclean. But clearly, learning about the scriptures about what is a carcasses and what's clean and unclean and what animals you do and do not touch is clearly written in the scriptures. So I appreciate every last one of you who hit the subscribe button as you're learning the difference between clean and unclean, as you're learning biblical truth, biblical doctrine without the dogma of man. Better yet, distinguish the difference between doctrine of man who considers and thinks and believes and teaches you that you can eat all animals. Anything. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you for joining me, and I greatly appreciate that. So touching the carcasses of unclean animals makes a person unclean until evening. Anyone who carries this carcass must wash their clothes and remains unclean until evening. These are animals that have split hooves or chew the cud. They're unclean. So it's some parts that have, the ones that chew the cud and split hooves are clean, but they have different ones that don't. We just kind of talked about that. Gotta wash your clothes. So camels, rabbits, pigs, lion, bears, dogs, and cats are considered to be unclean animals, and their carcasses, if they die within themselves, will be considered unclean. And I know that's hard to hear about the dogs and the cats because they have paws. That's what makes them unclean. And many people have they have dogs and cats in their home. But again, we're learning about what the scripture says versus what man thinks in his own ways. We're called to separate ourselves from uncleanness. Touch no unclean thing. You find that all the way back in Isaiah chapter 52, actually, verse 11. And again, Do not touch what is unclean is what Paul continued to teach. Royal priesthood, we are to teach people the difference between holy and unholy. That is our job. Still today. That is our job. And this is what we are continue to work on. Verse 29. Now these are to you the unclean among the swarming things, also animals that swarm, things which swarm on the earth, the mole, the mice, the great lizard in his kind, the gecko, the crocodile, the lizard, the sand reptile, and the chameleons. These are to you unclean among all swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead becomes unclean until evening. Also, anything of which one of them may fall when they're dead becomes unclean, including a wooden article, clothing, hide, a sack, or article which is made should be put in the water and be unclean until evening. Then it becomes clean after that evening. As for any earthware vessel in which one of them may have fall or fell into, mice, all those things, whatever is in becomes unclean and you shall break the vessel. Those are the things that are made of those clay things. So this is expanding the instructions of unclean animals, focusing on the swarming creatures, that can affect you to be pure. These creatures are not only unclean to eat, but they can cause for you to be impure, unclean through contact when they die. These are animals, again, what people have in their home, the gecko, and some people have lizards, chameleons and things like that. The mice, the mole, these are creatures that move close to the ground, often in the dark or hidden places. These are the animals you find in that direction. So it's important to understand, some of these animals, many of them, spread diseases. This is a way of making sure everyone stay clean, prevent those diseases, all that Yehovah already written in his word, where some people, the CDC and all those things, kind of try to teach you about. This has been written thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago. Verse 34, and of the food which may be eaten, on which water comes, shall become unclean. Any liquor which may be drunk in every vessel shall become unclean. Moreover, everything on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. On an oven or a stove shall be smashed. These are the animals we just talked about, the mice and the geckos and all those type of things shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Nonetheless, a spring or a crescent collecting water shall be clean, though the one who touches their carcasses shall be unclean. Now, if a part of the carcass falls on any of the seed of sown which is to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and the part of the carcass falls on it, is unclean to you. Also, if one of the animals dies, which you have for food, the one who touches the carcass become unclean until the evening. So one of the animals, again, that you have for food, but it dies and you touch it, its carcass become unclean until the evening. He too who eats some of this carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening, and the one who picks up his carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. So this is explaining how food and objects become ritually unclean when they come into contact with the carcasses of unclean animals. The focus is transference of the impurity regarding food, water containers, outlines the laws concerning becoming unclean by touching or eating carcasses of unclean animal that had died naturally without being properly slaughtered. unclean animals can, unlike unclean animals, clean animals that die on its own still cause temporary impurity. That's important to understand. Just because it's a clean animal, but it dies of itself, it still can make you unclean because it died of itself. This is why the Father is most definitely teaching you how to prevent diseases and all this type of thing. And that's probably why this is my thought. I'm just going to say it. Why certain animals you can't eat and some animals you can't eat. That's good for our bodies. So if a clean animal dies, touching its carcass makes a person unclean till evening. Anyone who eats from the dead animal must wash his clothes and unclean till the evening. Anyone who carries the carcass must also wash the clothes and remains unclean until the evening. Now, I'm missing a passage. I do believe I don't see it because I'm missing verse 41, but I can quickly look that up because it is the end of the passage. I'm so sorry. I was reading it and didn't include it in today's teaching. So we ended with verse 38. Also, if any one of the animals dies with you, oh, we did that one. 41. Now, every swarm, I feel like I'm repeating myself. Forgive me on today. Nope, 41. Now, every swarm thing that swarms the earth is detestable, not to be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet, and regard to every swarming thing swarms on earth, you should not eat them because they are detestable. Do not make yourself detestable through any other swarming things that swarm. You should not make yourself unclean with them so that you become unclean. For I am Yehovah, your Elohim. Consecrate yourself therefore and be holy. Here we go. Because I am holy. Again, for I am Yehovah, your Elohim. Consecrate yourselves, therefore be holy because I am holy. And you should not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. For I am Yehovah who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. So you should be holy because I am holy. So the Father continues teaching and addressing of eating the swarm creatures, the insects, the reptiles, those type of things, and calls us to holiness, reminding Israel and those who join in why they must be set apart for their dietary choices. He is saying, Leviticus 11 is setting some instructions for how you eat to separate yourself from the rest of the world and be holy, for he is holy. I'm hoping everyone get that, because you cannot eat what you want to eat and still say that you're following the Messiah, that you are trying to follow him and be his bride. If he followed the instructions and told you to follow him and that you're supposed to do the things that the Father said to do, how are you going to be the bride? If you do everything else everyone else is doing things in their own eyes. There's certain insects that we can eat. There's certain insects that we can't eat. Rodents and reptiles are not allowed to eat. He is calling us to holiness once again. Verse 46. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters, everything that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the clean and the unclean, between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. To make a distinction between clean and unclean, between the animals that's considered food and the animals that consider not to be food. Unfortunately, so many people are missing this part of being a set apart, holy, royal priesthood. Is missing out of so many people's lives. This passage teaches us that holiness is not just a concept by a way of life, it's really being set apart. Avoid anything that defiles the mind, the body, and the spirit. As you continue with 2 Corinthians, which is probably going to be my recommended reading. But it reminds us that our identity is in Yehovah, who redeemed us through his son. We are trying to avoid the wrath of the Father that we read about in Revelation. How do you avoid the wrath in the book of Revelation? You have to follow the instructions, keep the commandments of Elohim and the testimony of his son. We learn an example of this wrath poured out in the book of Exodus. Leviticus chapter 11 again lists us some, not all, of the dietary instructions. We have to understand which animals you can and cannot eat. It's a call of holiness, discernment. Yehovah commands the people to be different. The difference between clean and unclean. Not only in what we eat, but how we live. How do we live and reflect the identity of a set apart nation? We have the example right here in Leviticus 11. Underlying the principle remains the same today. Holiness requires us discerning, rightly dividing the word of truth, and walking. Walk it out, just as Israel was called to walk it out then, to be separated, just as Yeshua walked it out before us and show us how to be separated. We are to do the same thing. Making intentional choices about what we consume physically, mentally, and spiritually. Ultimately, these laws point to a deeper truth. Yehovah is holy, and those who belong to him must strive to be holy too. This is why I began with 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 through 16, because they are still in the writings of Peter and Paul and of today, calling for separation, being set apart. Examine your life and ask, what am I consuming physically, mentally, and spiritually? Just as Yehovah called, again, Israel out, the difference between clean and unclean. Today, we'll do the same thing. Take a step forward of cleaning yourself, separating yourself, learning the scriptures, and walking it out. Be intentional. Pursue holiness. Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all is righteousness. The way Yehovah does things. Now, I'm encourage you continue your studies. Take Leviticus chapter 11, meditate on it, search the scriptures. Most definitely, you cannot study Peter's vision without Leviticus chapter 11. You can't study Paul's, you can't study Peter's writings. You cannot separate the two. You can if you want to, but you shouldn't. Now, I'm encouraging you to join me on Saturday at 10 o'clock a.m. because we are going to complete the last chapter of Acts, Acts chapter 28. So I'm encouraging you to join me on that journey as we finish this powerful book of Acts. And join me next Tuesday because we'll be in Leviticus chapter 2 again at 7 o'clock p.m. As always, man does not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yehovah. Now, Don't leave out of here without hitting that subscribe button. Don't leave out of here without making a comment, sending a heart, send something to let me know that you are enjoying, you're learning what I am sharing with you. So I'm praying that you have a blessed rest of the week. Send your comments and questions throughout. I would acknowledge those and respond to those as they come in during the replay. But I want you to have a blessed rest of the week in Yehovah, and join me on Saturday at 10 o'clock a.m. And thank you once again for joining me on today. I greatly appreciate it.